After 10 years of secrecy, Michael Schumacher's private nurse finally speaks out. What she reveals isn't just another medical update. It's a powerful testament to love, family, and the human spirit that will touch your heart. Elise Maurer kept her promise of confidentiality for nearly a decade. Now, with the family's blessing, she shares the truth that's been hidden behind headlines. Michael Schumacher is still present in his family's life in ways that medical charts can't measure and tabloids can't understand. This isn't a story of miraculous recovery or tragic loss, but something far more profound. A glimpse into the quiet moments of connection that have given the Schumacher family strength through their most challenging journey. What Elise reveals about Michael's continued presence in their lives will change how you see not just his story, but what it means to truly love someone through life's most difficult circumstances. I sit at my small kitchen table in Geneva, hands wrapped around a mug of tea that has long gone cold. Outside, rain taps against the window, matching the nervous rhythm of my heart. My name is Elise Maurer. For 10 years, I kept a secret that weighed on me every day. Today, that changes. The clock on my wall reads 9:17 p.m. In 3 minutes, my interview goes live. The first time I will publicly speak about my years as Michael Schumacher's private nurse. I glance at the photo frame beside me. It's the only picture I have with the Schumacher family. A Christmas gathering from 2018. Corinna had insisted I join them, saying, "Your family now, Elise." In the photo, I stand slightly off to the side, professional even then, while the family clusters together. Michael sits in his specially designed chair, a red blanket covering his legs. His face isn't visible to the camera. It never is in the rare family photos released to the public. The confidentiality agreement I signed sits on the table before me, its legal words spelling out consequences I've memorized. But some promises matter more than contracts. My phone buzzes. It's a text from Sophie, my sister. "Are you sure about this?" Am I? The question follows me like a shadow. I was just 32 when I first joined Michael's care team in 2014. Before that, I worked at Grenoble University Hospital, where they brought him after the accident. I wasn't assigned to him then. Only the most senior staff handled his case. But I remember the chaos of that day, how the hospital seemed to hold its breath when word spread that Michael Schumacher had been admitted with a severe head injury. The media camped outside for weeks. Fans held vigils in the parking lot, their candles tiny beacons of hope in the winter darkness. I would pass them on my way home, their faces turned toward the hospital windows, as if they could will their hero back to health. 6 months later, when Michael was stable enough to be moved home to Switzerland, I received a call that changed my life. They needed experienced nurses for his private care team. Someone had recommended me. Would I be interested? The interview with Corinna Schumacher remains vivid in my memory. She sat across from me in a small office at the University Hospital of Lausanne, dark circles under her eyes, but her gaze sharp and assessing. "Whoever joins our team becomes part of our family's most vulnerable moment," she told me. "Michael gave the world everything on the racetrack. Now, he deserves privacy and dignity." I understood then what she was really asking. Not just skill, not just compassion, but absolute loyalty. "I promise," I said. And I meant it. For 9 years, I kept that promise. I watched Mick grow from a teenager into a Formula One driver like his father. I saw Gina Maria bring her equestrian medals to show her father. I witnessed Corinna's unwavering devotion, how she spoke to Michael every day as if he could answer, how she redesigned their home to better care for him while ensuring it still felt like a home. Many nights, I would sit by Michael's bedside, monitoring his vitals while the rest of the house slept. Sometimes I would talk to him too, about the F1 races we watched together on the room's TV, about the letters fans still sent by the box full, about how much the world missed him. In those quiet hours, I began to notice things. Small things at first, changes in his breathing, when certain voices filled the room, the slight movement of fingers when Mick described his racing experiences, moments so subtle that medical charts couldn't capture them. Those moments are why I'm breaking my silence now. I pick up my phone and type a reply to Sophie. Yes, the world needs to know he's still there. Not the details of his medical condition. Those remain private. Not photos or recordings. Those belong only to his family. But the truth about the man behind the headlines, behind the speculation, behind the wall of privacy the family built to protect him. My tea has gone completely cold now. I pour it out and make a fresh cup, moving through my small apartment with the same careful efficiency I learned in nursing school and perfected in Michael's care. Every movement has purpose. Nothing is wasted. The television in my living room is set to the news channel that will air my interview. I haven't turned it on yet. Once I do, there's no going back. I think about what pushed me to finally speak. It wasn't the tabloid offers of money. Those started coming just months after the accident and never stopped. It wasn't for attention or fame. I'd seen firsthand how those things could destroy privacy. It was Martin, a 12-year-old boy I met at a rehabilitation center where I volunteered after leaving my position with the Schumachers last year. Martin had been in a car accident that left him with a spinal cord injury. He wore a faded Schumacher cap every day. He's still fighting his hardest race, Martin told me when I asked about the cap. That's what my dad says. If Michael Schumacher can keep fighting, so can I. In that moment, I realized the power of hope. Not false hope, but the genuine kind. Michael's story wasn't over. The world just couldn't see the new chapters being written behind closed doors. My phone buzzes again. It's the producer. 5 minutes, Ms. Maurer. Are you ready? I take a deep breath and finally turn on the TV. The news anchor is introducing the segment, showing footage of Michael in his racing days. The red Ferrari, the champagne celebrations, the 7 World Championships. Then they cut to images of the ski resort in Maribel, France, where everything changed on December 29, 2013. I straighten my blouse and touch the small Ferrari pin on my lapel, a gift from Corinna on my last day. So you always remember, she had said. The truth I'm about to share isn't sensational. It won't make dramatic headlines, but it's important. It's human. It's real. My phone rings. It's time. I answer the call, clearing my throat. This is Elise Maurer, I say. I'm ready to begin. This is Elise Maurer, I say. I'm ready to begin. The interviewer's voice is warm but professional. Ms. Maurer, thank you for joining us. You were part of Michael Schumacher's care team for 9 years. Before we talk about your experience, can you take us back to December 29, 2013? My mind travels back to that winter day, clear as if it happened yesterday. I wasn't with Michael when it happened. None of us were. But the day of his accident changed everything. For him, for his family, and eventually, for me. I was working at Grenoble University Hospital. I begin. It was a normal Sunday shift until suddenly everything changed. Word spread quickly among the staff that Michael Schumacher was being airlifted to us after a skiing accident in Maribel. Remember how the hospital corridors buzzed with urgent whispers. Michael Schumacher, the Formula One legend, the man who won 7 world championships, the hero to millions, was coming to our hospital with a severe head injury. He was skiing with his son Mick in the French Alps, I continue. They were on an off-piste area between two marked runs. Michael was a very good skier, but he hit a rock hidden beneath the snow. Even though he was wearing a helmet, the impact caused serious trauma to his head. The interviewer asks, "Were you part of the medical team that day?" "No," I explain. "I wasn't senior enough then, but I remember the rush of the emergency team preparing for his arrival. The helicopter landed on our roof at about 11:30 a.m. Professor Salient, who had treated Michael for racing injuries before, flew in specially to be there. I don't share what we all knew later, that Michael was conscious but confused when they first brought him in, that his condition deteriorated rapidly. Some details still belong only to the family. They took him straight to surgery, I say instead. The doctors needed to relieve the pressure on his brain. Everyone was working so fast, but also so carefully. This was Michael Schumacher. Outside the hospital, news crews arrived within hours. Fans began gathering too, holding Ferrari flags and handmade signs. "Keep fighting, Michael," they read. "We are with you." The crowd grew larger each day, standing silent vigil in the cold December air. His family arrived quickly. Corinna, his children, his brother, Ralph. They looked shocked, as anyone would be. One moment, they were enjoying a holiday ski trip. The next, they were in a hospital waiting room. Their lives completely changed. I pause, remembering the updates that spread through the hospital. The first surgery, then a second to remove a hematoma. The induced coma to help his brain heal. The critical 48 hours that stretched into weeks, the doctors spoke to the press. A few times in those early days, I continue, they had to. The whole world was waiting for news. But they were very careful about what they shared. Already, the family was trying to protect Michael's privacy. What I don't say is how the medical team whispered about his chances. Head injuries are unpredictable. Some patients wake up unchanged. Others never wake at all. Many fall somewhere in between. For Michael, no one knew what the future would hold. By January, things had stabilized enough that they began slowly bringing him out of the coma. But recovery from brain injuries takes time. So much time. In March 2014, everything changed again. The media attention never stopped, but the family decided it was time to move forward. They announced that Michael had shown small, encouraging signs and would leave Grenoble Hospital. In April, the family released a statement saying Michael had moments of consciousness and awakening. In June, he was moved from Grenoble to Lausanne in Switzerland, closer to the family's home. That's when my story with the Schumachers really begins. The interviewer asks me about the transfer to Lausanne, but my mind is on the scene I witnessed that day. The careful loading of the ambulance, the police escort ready to clear the way, the medical team's intense focus on keeping Michael stable during the journey. It was a complicated transfer, I say simply. Any movement is risky for a patient in Michael's condition. But the Swiss hospital was only about 100 miles from the Richt family's home on Lake Geneva. Everyone knew he would eventually need long-term care. Being closer to home was important. What came next was the next phase of Michael's journey. By September 2014, he had left the hospital in Lausanne and returned home, the Schumacher property. In Gland, Switzerland was transformed into a state-of-the-art medical facility where Michael could receive the care he needed while being with his family. That's when I was called, I tell the interviewer. They were assembling a private care team. My supervisor recommended me because of my experience with neurological patients. I never expected to be chosen, but 3 days later, I was sitting across from Corinna Schumacher, about to promise her something I would keep for 9 years. And that promise was, the interviewer prompts, to protect Michael's dignity and privacy, I reply. Until now, the interviewer leans forward. What changed? Why speak now after all these years? I'll get to that, I say. But first, let me tell you about my first day with the Schumachers. It was October 2014 when I drove through the gates of the Schumacher estate in Gland for the first time. The property sits on the shores of Lake Geneva, surrounded by tall trees that shield it from prying eyes. Security was tight. I had to show my ID at 2 checkpoints before reaching the main house. The home was beautiful, but not flashy. Despite Michael's fame and fortune, the Schumachers always valued privacy over showiness. Now, part of the house had been transformed into what looked like a hospital wing, with state-of-the-art medical equipment carefully integrated into the home environment. Sabine Kim, Michael's longtime manager and spokesperson, met me at the door. She had a kind smile but watchful eyes that seemed to evaluate my every move. "Corinna will see you in the study," she said, leading me through the house. I remember being struck by the photos that lined the hallway. Michael with his family, Michael racing, Michael on podiums with trophies raised high. His life before, that day in Maribel, was preserved here like a museum to happier times. Corinna Schumacher waited in a warm room filled with books. She looked tired but composed, rising to shake my hand with a firm grip. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Maurer," she said. "Please, sit." For nearly an hour, she interviewed me, not just about my medical qualifications, which had already been vetted, but about who I was as a person. Did I follow Formula One? A little, I told her honestly. Did I understand what privacy meant to their family? I thought I did, though I would come to understand it much more deeply. Could I handle the pressure of caring for someone whose condition was the subject of worldwide speculation? "Every person who works in this house is more than staff," she explained. "We must be able to trust completely. The media offers money for information. People pretend to be delivery workers to get access. Some days, it feels like the whole world is trying to peek through our windows." Her voice didn't waver, but I saw how her hands tightened around her cup of tea. "I understand," I said. "Do you?" she asked, her eyes meeting mine directly. Michael gave everything to his fans when he was racing. Every victory, every defeat, it was all public. But this journey is different. This belongs to us, to him, not to the world. I nodded. In nursing school, they teach us about patient confidentiality. But this goes beyond that. This is about family. Something in my answer seemed to satisfy her. She stood up and said, "I'd like you to meet Michael now." Nothing could have prepared me for that first meeting. In my mind, Michael Schumacher was still the vibrant champion I'd seen on television. Confident, strong, always in motion. The man I met that day was so different, yet somehow still carried an unmistakable presence. The room was spacious and bright, with large windows looking out over the lake. Medical equipment lined one wall, carefully arranged to be functional but not overwhelming. Michael lay in a specially designed bed, the kind that can be adjusted in multiple ways to prevent pressure sores and aid breathing. Corinna went to him immediately, taking his hand and speaking softly. "Michael, this is Elise. She's going to be helping take care of you." I approached carefully, using the calm, gentle manner I'd developed over years of nursing. Up close, I could see that while the accident had changed him physically, his face still held echoes of the man known to millions. "Hello, Mr. Schumacher," I said. "It's an honor to meet you." Corinna showed me how she spoke to him, how she would describe what was happening around him, the day's events, family news. She demonstrated the routines they'd established, how he was positioned when his medications were given, his physical therapy schedule. Dr. Benoit will go over the medical details, she explained, referring to the neurologist who supervised Michael's care. But I wanted you to understand something first. In this room, Michael is not a patient. He is my husband, Mick and Gina's father. We care for him as we always have. With love. Before I left that day, Corinna handed me a document. It was the EHE confidentiality agreement, many pages of legal language that essentially said, I would never speak about what I saw in their home. Everyone signs this, she said. But the real promise I need isn't something a lawyer can write. I understood what she wasn't saying. Paper promises can be broken. She needed to know that my character wouldn't allow such a breach of trust. I promise, I said simply. What happens here stays here. She nodded, and I saw a brief moment of relief cross her face. It was a look I would come to recognize over the years, the momentary lightening of a burden she carried every day. The next morning, I officially joined Michael Schumacher's care team. I didn't know then that I would stay for 9 years, or that I would witness moments that would change how I understood human connection and resilience. So what was it like? The interviewer asks, pulling me back to the present. Those first weeks, caring for one of the most famous men in the world? I take a deep breath. It was like learning a new language, the language of caring for someone whose body was still, but whose presence filled every room. The interviewer nods, encouraging me to continue. I close my eyes briefly, bringing back memories of those early days at the Schumacher home on Lake Geneva. The house was modified specifically for Michael's care, I explain. What used to be a large ground-floor office had been transformed into his main room. It had everything a hospital room would have, but it didn't feel like one. Corinna had seen to that. The medical bed was positioned near windows that offered views of the garden and lake beyond. The walls were painted a warm yellow instead of sterile white. Family photos lined the shelves, and there was always music playing softly, usually classical, which I learned had been Michael's preference even before the accident. Our daily routine started early, I continue. The morning team arrived at 6 a.m. for the first assessments and care. I usually worked the day shift, from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., though that changed over the years. I don't go into detail about the medical aspects, the feeding tubes, the medication schedules, the careful monitoring of vital signs, the prevention of bed sores and infections that are constant concerns for any immobile patient. These details feel too intimate to share. What I can tell you is that Michael received the highest level of care possible. The family spared no expense. There was always a doctor on call, and specialists visited regularly. Neurologists, physical therapists, respiratory therapists. Everyone working together to give him the best chance at whatever recovery might be possible. I remember the physical therapy sessions most vividly. Twice daily, therapists would move Michael's limbs through careful exercises to prevent muscle atrophy and joint contractures. Sometimes they used a special frame to put him in an upright position, supporting his body while stimulating the natural patterns of standing. The most remarkable thing was how Corinna made sure that Michael remained part of daily life, I say. She never treated him as if he wasn't there. Neither did the children. Mick and Gina Maria were teenagers when I started, working with the family. Despite their young age, they showed incredible maturity. They would come into their father's room after school, pull up chairs next to his bed, and talk about their day as if everything was normal. Mick would describe his go-kart races in vivid detail, I tell the interviewer. He'd say, "Papa, I took that corner just like you taught me, and I was 2 seconds faster than everyone else." Gina would bring in pictures of her horses and explain each one. It was their way of keeping their father in their lives. The interviewer asks, "Was there any response from Michael during these interactions?" I'm careful with my answer. I'm not going to discuss specific medical details about Michael's condition. That remains private. What I can say is that in cases of severe brain injury, responses can be subtle, and families often notice things that even medical professionals might miss. What I don't say is how sometimes, during these family visits, I would notice small changes on the monitors, slight variations in heart rate or blood pressure that coincided with certain voices or topics. But those observations belong to the family, not to the world. Special days were always celebrated, I continue instead. Birthdays, Christmas, anniversaries, the family maintained these traditions. On Michael's birthday each January, they would decorate his room with Ferrari red balloons and streamers. Close friends like Jean Todt would visit. There was always cake, and they would sing to him. Jean Todt, the former Ferrari team principal who led Michael to 5 of his world championships, was one of the few people outside the family who visited regularly. Unlike many others who drifted away as years passed, Todt remained a constant presence. He would sit with Michael for hours, sometimes watching Formula One races together. The house had a rhythm to it, I explain. Medical care was always the priority, but around that foundation, normal life continued. Corinna ran their horse ranch business. The children went to school. Seasons changed outside the windows. Lake Geneva would freeze in winter and shine like diamonds in summer. Security remained tight throughout my years there. The property has tall fences and cameras. Trusted staff would stay for years. The housekeeper, the gardener, the security, team. Everyone was like extended family. We celebrated the small victories, I say. In brain injury recovery, progress isn't measured in great leaps, but in tiny steps. A good day might mean stable medical readings, no infections, or simply a peaceful night's sleep. What defined a good day changed over the years. In the beginning, it meant no medical emergencies. Later, it expanded to include the subtle signs of awareness that gave the family hope. Living at Lake Geneva meant adapting to a new normal, I continue. For the family, it meant learning to balance grief for what was lost with appreciation for what remained. For the medical team, it meant providing not just physical care but emotional support. The interviewer asks about difficult times, and I nod slowly. Of course, there were hard days. Medical setbacks are inevitable with such serious injuries. The family faced them with remarkable strength. Corinna, especially, never showed defeat. She would say, "Michael never gave up on the track, and we won't give up on him." During my years there, I watched Mick follow in his father's footsteps, moving from go-karts to formula racing. Gina Maria developed into a world-class equestrian. Life moved forward, even as Michael's condition created a kind of suspended time within the walls of his room. What many people don't understand, I say, looking directly at the camera, is that life after a severe brain injury isn't about waiting for a miracle where someone suddenly wakes up unchanged. It's about finding a new way to be a family, to connect, to find meaning. The Schumachers did this with grace and determination that I still find inspiring. They built a cocoon of love around Michael while continuing to live the lives he would have wanted for them. Every morning when I arrived, I tell the interviewer, Corinna would already be there, sitting beside him, holding his hand, talking softly. And every night when I left, she would still be there. That never changed in all my years with them. The interviewer nods, clearly moved. And the medical room itself, what was that like day to day? It was a place where medical care happened, yes, I reply. But more importantly, it was where a family refused to be broken by tragedy. It was a room filled with love. The interviewer pauses thoughtfully before asking, "You spent 9 years with Michael Schumacher. The world knows the racing champion, but you came to know the man. What can you tell us about who he really is?" I smile slightly. This is what I've been waiting to share. Not medical details, but the human side that has been lost in years of speculation. Most people know Michael Schumacher as the 7-time Formula One world champion. They remember his red Ferrari racing down tracks around the world, his intense focus, his competitive spirit. But in that house, I learned about a different Michael. Through stories told by family and friends during their visits, through photos and mementos that filled the home, I pieced together a more complete picture of the man I was caring for. Corinna would often share stories while we worked together in his room, I explain. She told me how they met at a Ferrari party in 1991, and how on their first date, he drove her home in a car with no passenger seat. She had to sit on a crate. I smile at the memory of Corinna laughing as she told that story, her eyes bright with the joy of the memory. She described how, despite his fame, he valued privacy and normal family life. They would go grocery shopping together in their small town, and he'd push the cart just like any other husband. He coached Mick's local football team when he was younger, standing on the sidelines cheering like any proud father. What struck me most was how different the private Michael seemed from his public image. On the track, he was famous for his unwavering determination and sometimes controversial competitive tactics. At home, he was known for his kindness and humility. His friend Jean Todt visited at least once a month, sometimes more, I continue. He would sit beside Michael's bed and talk about current Formula One races, FIA matters, or reminisce about their glory days at Ferrari. John would bring news from the racing world, updates on drivers Michael had known, changes to regulations and tracks. Sometimes he'd bring videos on his tablet, old races they'd won together, current F1 highlights, or special messages from former colleagues. During one visit, Jean told me how Michael was different behind closed doors. The media painted him as cold and calculating, Jean said, but they never saw how he cried when he visited children in hospitals. They never saw how he donated millions to charity without wanting recognition. This matched what Ross Brawn once said during a visit. Brawn had been Michael's technical director at both Benetton and Ferrari, helping him win all 7 championships. Ross told me about Michael's incredible technical mind, I say. How he could remember every detail about a car's performance and communicate exactly what needed to be fixed. But he also described how Michael would remember the birthdays of every team member and make sure they were celebrated. I learned that Michael had paid for the education of several children of team members who had died. He had quietly funded hospitals and relief efforts after natural disasters. These weren't publicized because he didn't want the attention. Felipe Massa, who was Michael's teammate at Ferrari, visited once with his family, I continue. He told his son, "This man taught me everything about being a professional racer. But more importantly, he taught me about being a good person." The picture that emerged from these stories was of a man with extraordinary talent who never lost touch with ordinary values. He was intensely private, dedicated to his family, and surprisingly gentle for someone so fierce on the track. Mick would sit and tell his father about his own racing journey, I tell the interviewer. Often he'd say, "I'm trying to do it," like, "You taught me, Papa." It was clear that Michael had been a hands-on father, deeply involved in his children's lives. Even before I worked for the family, Michael had stepped back from racing to spend more time with his children. He turned down a $100 million offer to continue racing after his first retirement in 2006, saying family time was more valuable. Saturn thing I noticed in the house was how many photo albums there were. I say, hundreds of family pictures, vacations, holidays, everyday moments. Michael was nearly always the one behind the camera, Corinna told me. He wanted to capture every special moment with his family. The interviewer asks, "Was there anything that surprised you about him?" "His sense of humor," I reply without hesitation. Corinna would tell me how he loved practical jokes. He once filled a friend's hotel room with foam packing peanuts. Another time, he dressed up as a delivery person to surprise a team member on their birthday. I pause, choosing my next words carefully. What I want people to understand is that Michael Schumacher is more than his racing records, more than his accident, more than his current condition. He's a husband whose wife still speaks of him with stars in her eyes. He's a father whose children carry his values and determination. He's a friend whose colleagues still travel across countries just to sit quietly at his side. The public only saw the helmeted racer, the podium celebrations, the short press conferences. They didn't see the man who planted trees with his children, who helped design their Swiss home, who loved animals and quiet evenings by the lake. The Michael I came to know through the stories of those who love him is a man worth fighting for, I conclude. And that's what his family has done every day since December 2013. The interviewer's next question is gentle but direct. "And during these 9 years, did you ever see anything that gave the family hope?" I meet her gaze steadily. "Yes, there were dark days, certainly, but there were also moments of light. A shadow crosses my face as I remember the difficult times. The hopeful moments will come later in my story. But first, I need to be honest about the challenges. The world has speculated for years about Michael's condition. I won't give them medical details, but I can share the human reality of caring for someone with a severe brain injury. The summer of 2016 was particularly difficult, I say after a pause. Michael developed complications, a respiratory infection that quickly became serious. It was the kind of setback that terrifies families and medical teams. Pneumonia is a constant threat for patients with limited mobility, and it can be life-threatening. I remember the frantic activity in the house. The specialists called in, the new equipment rushed to his bedside. For nearly 2 weeks, we worked in shifts around the clock. The doctors were concerned enough that they stayed at the house instead of just being on call. Corinna refused to leave his room. She had a small cot brought in and slept there every 8 nights. What I don't describe is the fear we all felt, the silent acknowledgement that we might lose him. How Mick, then 17 and already pursuing his own racing career, would come home from training and sit rigid with worry beside his father's bed. How Gina Maria would bring her worry to the stable, brushing her horses for hours in silent tears. Dr. Benoit, who oversaw Michael's care, tried to convince Corinna to take breaks, to get proper rest. She wouldn't hear of it. "I'm staying," she would say. "He would do the same for me." The interviewer asks, "How did the family cope during these difficult periods?" "They leaned on each other," I reply, "and they focused on practical things, what needed to be done hour by hour. Sometimes that's all you can do." I remember watching Corinna during those weeks, how she would speak to Michael as they adjusted his medication, explaining what was happening, assuring him he would be okay. Her voice never wavered, even when her eyes were red from crying in private. What people don't understand about caring for someone with a severe brain injury is that it's not a steady upward journey. There are improvements followed by setbacks. Progress isn't linear. You celebrate small victories, then face new challenges. I explain how the body and brain are connected systems. A seemingly minor issue like a urinary tract infection can trigger larger problems. Sleep patterns can be disrupted. Medication that works well for months suddenly needs adjustment. During these difficult periods, the hardest thing for the family was the uncertainty. With many illnesses, doctors can give clear prognoses. With brain injuries, especially severe ones, there are no guarantees. Mick would call from racing events, his young voice tight with worry, asking for updates. Friends who normally visited would be asked to stay away temporarily. The house, usually filled with quiet activity, would become a tense space of whispered medical consultations and beeping monitors. What amazed me about the Schumachers was their resilience, I continue. Even in the darkest moments, they never spoke of giving up. Their dedication never wavered. There were practical challenges too. The constant rotation of medical supplies, the coordination of specialist appointments, the management of medications. Brain injury recovery is not just emotionally exhausting, but logistically complex. By September 2016, Michael had stabilized again. We all breathed a collective sigh of relief. But those weeks changed us. They reminded us of the fragility of the situation. I don't tell the interviewer about the night I found Corinna sobbing in the kitchen at 3 a.m., clutching one of Michael's old racing shirts. Some private moments should remain private. There were other difficult periods, I continue. Times when progress seemed to stall completely. Months would pass with no noticeable changes. Those plateaus tested everyone's faith. The interviewer asks, "How did you personally cope with these challenges as his nurse?" I consider the question carefully. By focusing on Michael as a person, not just a patient. By remembering that behind every medical procedure was a man who had lived an extraordinary life and was loved by his family. And by finding meaning in even the smallest aspects of care, I learned to measure success differently. A stable day was a good day. Preventing problems was as important as solving them. Every time we helped Michael avoid a bed sore, every infection prevented through careful practice. These were victories worth celebrating in the world of long-term care. The media often painted a black and white picture. Either Michael would make a miraculous recovery, or he was lost to his family. The reality exists in the countless shades of gray between those extremes. What I want to convey without breaking confidentiality is how the family adapted to this new reality, finding ways to include Michael in their lives despite the limitations imposed by his condition. What struck me most was how the family protected Michael's dignity through everything. They never discussed his condition publicly, not because they were hiding something terrible, but because they believed his right to privacy didn't end with his accident. I remember one particularly difficult day when a European tabloid published a fabricated story claiming to have inside information about Michael's condition. The details were completely false, clearly invented for sensationalism, but the family still had to deal with the renewed attention and the fresh wave of calls from concerned friends. Sabine Kim, Michael's manager, handled the media pressure with remarkable grace, I say. She became the shield that protected the family's privacy. She fielded the endless requests for updates and statements, allowing the Schumachers to focus on what mattered most, being there for Michael. I pause, gathering myself for what comes next. But even in those dark days, there were moments that gave us hope. Small signs that reminded us that Michael was still present in ways that medical charts couldn't capture. The interviewer leans forward. "What kind of signs?" I smile slightly. The kind that made us wonder what was happening behind his still exterior. The kind that made all the difficult days worthwhile. The interviewer waits patiently as I collect my thoughts. These are the moments I've been most careful about sharing, balancing what the world deserves to know against what belongs only to the family. Brain injuries are mysterious. I begin. Modern medicine has made incredible advances, but there's still so much we don't understand about consciousness, awareness, and how the brain heals. In nursing school, we learned about the different states of consciousness after brain injury, from coma to vegetative state to minimally conscious state to greater levels of awareness. But these clinical terms fail to capture the complexity of real patients, the gray areas between defined categories. What I can tell you is that we tried many different approaches to stimulate Michael's senses and potentially aid his brain's healing process. Music was a constant presence in his room. Sometimes it was recordings of Formula One engines, the distinctive Ferrari sound he would know so well. Other times it was his favorite classical pieces. Research suggests familiar sounds might reach patients even when they appear unresponsive. Corinna would read letters from fans aloud, I continue. Thousands of people wrote to Michael over the years, sharing how he had inspired them. She selected positive messages and would read them as part of their daily routine. Physical therapy was another key component, preventing muscle atrophy while potentially stimulating neural pathways. The therapists would talk through each movement, explaining what they were doing and why, always addressing Michael directly. We also tried more experimental approaches, I explain. Aromatherapy with scents from the racetracks. Recordings of his children's voices at different ages. Ferrari red objects placed in his line of sight. The interviewer asks, "And did you see responses to these stimuli?" I choose my words with care. There were moments that gave us pause. Times when monitors showed changes in heart rate or blood. Pressure that coincided with certain voices or topics, especially when Mick or Gina Maria spoke about their achievements. What I remember most vividly was a day in 2017 when Mick came home excited after winning his first major Formula 3 race at Spa in Belgium, a track where his father had excelled. He rushed to Michael's room, still in his racing suit, and described every turn, every overtake, his voice bubbling with excitement. I noticed changes in the monitoring equipment, I say simply, patterns that were different from his baseline readings. I don't specify what the changes were. That information feels too private. But I remember how Corinna and I exchanged glances across the bed. A silent acknowledgement that something was happening, even if we couldn't define exactly what. There were other moments too, when Jean Todt brought a recording of Michael's old Ferrari team singing Happy Birthday, when Gina won her first gold medal in Western riding and placed it in his hand. I think of the research on disorders of consciousness, how patients sometimes show awareness in ways that casual observation might miss, how sophisticated brain imaging has revealed that some patients thought to be unresponsive can actually mentally respond to questions or instructions even if they can't physically demonstrate it. One thing that impressed me was how the family always operated on the assumption that Michael could hear and understand everything, I explain. They never spoke about him as if he wasn't there. They included him in conversations, in decisions, in family moments. Corinna would consult with him about business matters related to their horse ranch. Mick would tell him about racing decisions. Gina would describe new horses she was considering buying. They maintained this practice consistently over years, regardless of visible responses. The brain is remarkably adaptable, I continue. There are cases of patients showing signs of awareness years or even decades after severe injuries. Recovery isn't always immediate or dramatic. I don't make specific claims about Michael's level of consciousness or awareness. That would cross the line into medical details I won't share. But I want to convey the complexity of his situation without feeding sensationalism or false hope. What I witnessed wasn't what Hollywood would call a miracle, I say. There was no moment where he suddenly sat up and started speaking. Brain injury recovery doesn't usually work that way. But there were small moments that defied explanation, that suggested something was happening beneath the surface. The house on Lake Geneva was filled with these small miracles, moments of connection that medical science might dismiss as coincidence, but that felt meaningful to those who witnessed them. I remember one evening when Corinna was playing their wedding song, I Share. The monitoring equipment showed changes that made the doctor on duty come into the room to check. He couldn't explain it medically, but he didn't dismiss it either. Fatandai, interviewer asks gently, "What do you think these moments meant?" "I think they meant we were right to keep hoping," I reply simply. They meant the Michael that his family knew and loved was still there in some way, still connected to them, even if that connection looked different than before. I lean forward slightly. And that, more than anything else, is what gave the family strength to continue their journey day after day, year after year. The interviewer nods thoughtfully. "You've spoken about Michael, but what about his family? How did they manage to move forward with their lives while caring for him?" "That's one of the most remarkable parts of this story," I reply. How Corinna, Mick, and Gina Maria built new lives around their changed circumstances without ever leaving Michael behind. When I first joined the Schumacher household, Mick was 15 and Gina Maria was 17. They were teenagers facing an unimaginable situation. Their father, once so vibrant and strong, now dependent on round-the-clock care. Many families fracture under such pressure, but the Schumachers grew closer. Corinna was the foundation, I explain. She somehow managed to be both mother and father to her children, while also overseeing Michael's care and running their business interests. The family owned a ranch in Switzerland, where they raised horses, as well as property in Mallorca and other investments. Corinna took over managing everything, making decisions she would have once shared with Michael, all while spending hours at his bedside each day. "I've never seen such strength," I say simply. She protected her children's right to have normal lives while ensuring Michael remained at the center of the family. From the beginning, Corinna insisted that Mick and Gina Maria continue pursuing their passions. For Gina Maria, this was competitive horseback riding. For Mick, it was following in his father's footsteps into racing. Watching Mick develop as a racer was especially poignant, I tell the interviewer. He had started karting with his father's guidance. After the accident, he had to continue that journey without Michael's direct advice. By 2016, Mick was competing in Formula 4, then Formula 3. In 2021, he reached Formula 1, the same pinnacle his father had dominated for so many years. Every step of this journey was celebrated in Michael's room. Before each of Mick's major races, Corinna would talk to Michael about it, explaining which track, which category, who the competitors were. During the race itself, they would often put the broadcast on in his room. I remember one particularly emotional day when Mick won the Formula 2 championship in 2020. The family gathered in Michael's room to watch the race together. When Mick crossed the finish line, securing the title, Corinna took Michael's hand and placed it on the TV screen during the celebration. Gina Maria followed a different path, I continue. She became a gold medal-winning equestrian, specializing in Western-style riding and reining competitions. She inherited her love of horses from both parents. Corinna had been a successful rider before meeting Michael. In 2017, Gina Maria won a gold medal at the FEI World Reining Championships. She brought it home and placed it in her father's hand, just as she had with every trophy since his accident. The family kept all their traditions, I explain. Birthdays, Christmas, anniversaries, they were all celebrated with Michael. They would decorate his room, bring in small cakes, sing songs, open gifts. For Michael's 50th birthday in January 2019, they organized a special celebration. Close friends were invited. Photographs from throughout his life were displayed around the room, and a video compilation of messages from former teammates and competitors was played. What struck me was how they balanced looking backward and moving forward, I say. They honored the man Michael had been while accepting their new reality. They found joy where they could. Corinna developed a system for including Michael in family decisions. She would present options about the children's education, about business investments, about family vacations, and talk through the choices as if they were making the decision together. She would say, "Michael, I think we should do this, but if you have another idea, give me a sign." And then she would wait, watching for any change, any response. Sometimes there would be nothing discernible. Other times there would be small changes, in breathing patterns, in monitors. These might have been coincidence, but Corinna chose to interpret them as communication. The children followed her example, I continue. Mick would ask his father for racing advice, then pause, as if waiting for an answer before saying, "I think so too, Papa." They created new family memories while keeping Michael at the center. When they couldn't bring him to events, they brought the events to him through photos, videos, and detailed descriptions. When Mick had his first Formula One race in Bahrain in 2021, they set up a live feed in Michael's room. Corinna stayed with him, describing everything the cameras didn't show: the atmosphere, the tension in the pit lane. The interviewer asks, did they ever express anger or resentment at how their lives had changed? I shake my head. Not that I ever saw. Of course they had difficult days. They're human. But they never questioned their commitment to Michael or to each other. I think of how Corinna once answered when a well-meaning visitor suggested she needed to move on with her life. "This is my life," she said. "Michael is my life. The children are my life. Nothing needs to change." What people outside the family couldn't understand was that they had found a way to move forward without leaving anyone behind. They built new lives around Michael, not apart from him. In many ways, I conclude, they showed the world what unconditional love truly means. Not just in dramatic moments, but in showing up, day after day, year after year, whether or not anything changed. The interviewer nods thoughtfully before shifting to a topic I knew would come up. Throughout all this, the family has maintained strict privacy. There have been no photos, no official updates beyond very basic statements. Yet the media has remained intensely interested in Michael's condition. What was that like from the inside? I take a deep breath. This is one of the most difficult aspects of the story to convey. The constant pressure that surrounded the family like an invisible wall. From the day of the accident, the media attention was overwhelming. I begin. Hundreds of reporters camped outside the hospital in Grenoble. When Michael was moved to Lausanne, they followed. When he went home to Gland, they were there too. And for those early months, photographers with long-range lenses would try to capture images through the trees surrounding the property. Helicopters occasionally flew over the estate, attempting to get aerial photos. The family had to increase security and install privacy screens around the gardens. But it wasn't just the photographers, I continue. It was the constant speculation, the false reports, the made-up insider sources claiming to have information. Every few months, tabloids would publish sensational headlines. Michael speaks his first words, or Schumacher can walk again. Or, conversely, family loses hope. None of these stories was true, but each one forced the family to issue denials, or, more often, maintain their dignified silence while weathering another storm of attention. People tried all sorts of tricks to get information, I tell the interviewer. Reporters posed as delivery drivers, distant relatives, even medical equipment technicians. Someone once pretended to be a priest, seeking to offer spiritual comfort. Security team was vigilant, but the attempts were constant. Phone calls came to the house from unknown numbers. Emails were sent to anyone connected with the family. Former staff members were approached with offers of money for information. Sabine Kame, Michael's manager, became the family's shield, I explain. She handled all media inquiries with remarkable patience, issuing the occasional brief statement when necessary, but mainly protecting the family's right to privacy. I remember how Sabine would arrive at the house after particularly intrusive media reports, her face tight with controlled anger. She and Corinna would speak privately, deciding whether a response was needed or if silence was the better strategy. In early 2016, the family had to take legal action against a German magazine that claimed Michael could walk again, I recall. It was completely false, but the story spread worldwide within hours. Corinna was forced to go to court to stop these harmful rumors. The court ruled in the family's favor, but the damage was already done. Each sensational headline brought new waves of well-wishers and curiosity seekers to the gates of the property, disrupting the peaceful environment they tried so hard to maintain. What many people don't understand is why the family has been so private, I say. It's not about hiding something terrible. It's about protecting Michael's dignity. Before his accident, Michael was one of the most recognized sports figures in the world, but he was intensely private about his personal life. He had always maintained a clear boundary between his public and private selves. Corinna once told me, "Michael gave the world his racing. He kept his vulnerability for us. I won't let that change now when he cannot choose for himself." I think this captures the family's motivation perfectly. They weren't denying the world information out of spite or secrecy, but out of love and respect for a man who valued his privacy. The hardest part for me personally, I admit, was seeing false information spread while knowing the truth. Sometimes I wanted to speak out, to correct the record, but I had made a promise. The interviewer asks, "Was there particular misinformation that bothered you the most?" "The extremes," I reply without hesitation. Either claims that Michael was essentially back to normal, or, conversely, that he was completely unaware of his surroundings. Neither was true, and both were hurtful to the family. The reality of brain injury recovery exists in the vast gray area between these extremes. Progress comes in tiny increments, not headline-worthy leaps. But nuance doesn't sell newspapers or generate clicks online. In December 2023, 10 years after the accident, there was another media surge, I recall. Anniversary stories, retrospectives, more speculation. The family issued a rare statement, thanking fans for their support, but again asking for privacy. Throughout all these years, the Schumachers never used Michael's condition for attention or financial gain. They never sold their story to a magazine or participated in a documentary about the accident. They protected his image and legacy with the same devotion they showed to the man himself. Looking back, I say, I believe history will judge them kindly for this choice. In an age where privacy seems outdated, they stood firm. They chose love over exposure, dignity over curiosity, family over fame. The interviewer looks at me with genuine interest. And yet, here you are, breaking your silence. What changed? It's the question I've been anticipating since this interview began. My hands fold together in my lap as I consider how to explain the journey that led me to this moment. I left my position with the Schumacher family in early 2023. I begin. After 9 years, it was time for a change, both for me and for them. We parted on good terms. I moved back to Geneva to be closer to my aging parents and began working at a rehabilitation center for children with brain injuries. The transition had been difficult. After years in the cocoon of the Schumacher household, the outside world felt overwhelming at first. I had grown accustomed to the rhythm of that home, to the people who had become like family to me. For months after leaving, I maintained my silence as I always had. I declined offers from tabloids. I changed the subject. When acquaintances asked about Michael, I kept my promise. But something happened that made me reconsider. Not my obligation to protect Michael's privacy, that remains sacred, but the possibility that sharing certain aspects of my experience might actually help others. There was a 12-year-old boy at the rehabilitation center. His name was Martin. He had suffered a brain injury in a bicycle accident 6 months earlier. Martin had made progress, but struggled with depression as he compared his slow recovery to his previously active life. His parents were exhausted and increasingly discouraged by the lack of dramatic improvement. One day, I noticed Martin wearing a red Ferrari cap. When I asked about it, his eyes lit up. "It's Michael Schumacher's," he told me. "He's still fighting his toughest race, just like me." The boy's father explained that Michael had been his childhood hero. After Martin's accident, he had told his son about Schumacher's situation to inspire him, to show him that even the strongest among us face challenges but continue fighting. Martin asked me if the stories were true, that Michael would never recover, that he was completely unresponsive, essentially gone, even though his body remained. These were the narratives that dominated online searches about Michael's condition. I found myself in a difficult position. I couldn't break confidentiality, but I could see how these misconceptions were affecting this child and his parents. The black and white portrayal, either miraculous recovery or no hope, was damaging their ability to appreciate the small victories in their own journey. I told Martin that brain injuries are complex, that recovery looks different for everyone, and that the most important thing is to recognize and celebrate even the smallest signs of progress. The boy seemed disappointed with my general answer, but his father caught my eye. Later, he approached me in the hallway. "You worked for them, didn't you?" he asked quietly. "For the Schumachers." I neither confirmed nor denied it, maintaining my professional boundaries, but he continued anyway. "I just need to know one thing," he said. "Not details, not private information, just, is there reason to keep hoping? For patients like Martin? For patients like Michael?" His question stayed with me for days. Not because I couldn't answer it, but because I realized my answer mattered to more people than just this one family. I began to see that the complete silence around Michael's condition had created a vacuum that was filled with extremes, either false hope or complete despair. Neither served families going through similar journeys. I thought carefully about what I could share that would help without betraying the Schumachers' trust. What general truths about brain injury recovery could I speak about from my experience, without revealing specific medical details about Michael? For weeks, I wrestled with this dilemma. I spoke with my sister Sophie, who has always been my most trusted advisor. I consulted a lawyer about the boundaries of my confidentiality agreement. What became clear was that while I could never disclose medical specifics or private family moments, I could speak about my broader experience as a caregiver. I could address the misconceptions without violating Michael's privacy. But I wouldn't do anything without the family's blessing, I tell the interviewer firmly. That was a line I would not cross. So I wrote a letter to Corinna Schumacher. I explained my encounter with Martin and his family. I outlined what I hoped to achieve by speaking publicly. Not sensationalism or exposure, but a more nuanced understanding of brain injury recovery that might help other families find their way through similar challenges. I expected a polite refusal, I admit, or perhaps no response at all. What I received instead surprised me. 2 weeks after sending my letter, I received a phone call from a familiar number. It was Corinna herself, calling to discuss my request. What she said in that conversation is what ultimately led me here today, I explain. But before I tell you about that, I need to share what I believe the world most needs to understand about Michael's journey. The interviewer nods, recognizing we've reached a pivotal moment in our conversation. And what is that? I take a deep breath. That presence and absence aren't binary states. That connection can exist even when communication has changed. That the Michael Schumacher his family knows and loves is still with them, even if the world can no longer see him. The studio falls silent. The interviewer leans forward slightly, sensing we've reached the heart of my story. This is the moment. I've been building toward the truth I believe the world needs to hear. For nearly 10 years, people have speculated about Michael's condition. I continue. They've painted pictures of extremes. Either he is essentially gone, or he is secretly recovering, and will one day miraculously return to public life. Neither is accurate. I choose my next words with extraordinary care, balancing my promise to the family with my purpose in speaking today. What I observed during my years with the Schumachers was something more complex and, in many ways, more profound than these simplistic narratives. I witnessed a family connecting with their husband and father in new ways, finding him still present, despite his changed condition. The interviewer asks, "Can you give us examples of what you mean by that?" I nod slowly. There were moments, small but significant, that suggested Michael was still aware on some level, still connected to his family. I can't and won't discuss specific medical details, but I can tell you what these moments meant to those who witnessed them. I think back to a day in 2016 when Corinna was sitting beside Michael's bed, holding his hand and talking about a decision she needed to make regarding their property in Mallorca. As she spoke, she felt a slight pressure against her fingers, the faintest squeeze of his hand. It lasted only a second, but it happened at the exact moment she asked, "What do you think, Michael?" Corinna would talk to Michael about family decisions, I explain. Sometimes, there would be responses that medical equipment couldn't measure. A slight change in facial expression, a shift in breathing, or the tiniest movement of fingers. Were these reflexes? Perhaps, but they often seemed to correspond with specific topics or voices. I remember another day when Mick came home after qualifying for his first Formula One race. He sat beside his father's bed and described every detail of the experience. As he spoke, I noticed a slight smile form on Michael's face, so subtle that someone not looking for it might have missed it entirely. When Mick achieved milestones in his racing career, he always shared them with his father, I say. During these moments, those of us in the room sometimes noticed small changes that felt meaningful, like Michael was connecting with his son's words in some way. Gina Maria experienced something similar when she brought her gold medal from the FEI World Reining Championships to show her father. As she placed it in his hand and described her winning performance, a tear formed in the corner of Michael's eye and slowly rolled down his cheek. I've worked with many patients with severe brain injuries, I continue. Sometimes families interpret normal reflexes as responses because they desperately want to see connection. But what I observed with the Schumachers went beyond wishful thinking. Even the medical team, doctors and therapists with decades of experience, would occasionally exchange glances when something happened that couldn't easily be explained away. I want to be extremely clear about what I'm saying and what I'm not saying. I'm not claiming miraculous recovery or suggesting that Michael is secretly able to communicate in ways the family has hidden from the world. The reality is both more modest and more meaningful than that. Brain injury specialists are increasingly recognizing that consciousness exists on a spectrum, I explain. Some patients who appear unresponsive in traditional evaluations show brain activity when tested. With advanced imaging techniques, they may be aware of their surroundings, recognize loved ones, and process information even when they cannot demonstrate this through conventional movements or speech. Research in this field has advanced significantly since Michael's accident. Studies using functional MRI have shown that some patients diagnosed as being in vegetative states can actually follow commands mentally, imagining activities when asked, even though they cannot physically respond. I believe Michael exists somewhere on this spectrum of consciousness. I say carefully. There were enough moments over the years, consistent patterns rather than isolated incidents, to suggest he remains connected to his family in ways that science may not yet fully understand or be able to measure. The most powerful of these moments happened on Michael's 50th birthday in January 2019. The family had gathered in his room, sharing memories and stories. Mick described the go-kart races they'd had years earlier. Gina Maria reminded him of their horse rides together. Corinna recalled their first date. During this celebration, I tell the interviewer, I was monitoring Michael's vital signs. As his family spoke, I noticed changes that prompted me to look more closely at him. What I saw made me call the doctor into the room. For a brief but unmistakable moment, Michael's eyes had focused on his family. They were open wider than usual, and there was an intensity to his gaze that felt different from the random eye movements we sometimes observed. It lasted perhaps 30 seconds before his expression returned to its typical state, but everyone in the room had seen it. The doctor examined him immediately, but couldn't offer a medical explanation for what we'd witnessed, I continue. He simply said, "Document it," and we did. But what medical notes couldn't capture was the feeling in that room, the sense that Michael had briefly but undeniably joined his family's celebration. I pause, gathering myself. Even now, years later, the memory brings emotions to the surface. I want to be absolutely clear, I say firmly. I am not claiming Michael will walk or talk again. I am not saying he will return to public life or give interviews about his experience. His injury was extremely severe, and the Michael who raced Formula One cars and stood on podiums holding trophies may indeed be gone forever. The interviewer nods, understanding the distinction I'm making. What I am saying is that the narrative of Michael Schumacher being completely absent from his family's life, being alive only in a technical sense, is not accurate based on what I witnessed. The connection between him and his loved ones continues in altered but meaningful ways. This is the truth that has been lost in years of sensational headlines and speculation. This is what families like Martin's need to understand about brain injury recovery, that it doesn't have to be all or nothing, that connection can persist even when traditional communication is no longer possible. The Schumachers have protected this truth fiercely, I explain, not because they're hiding something tragic, but because these moments of connection are incredibly personal. They don't want Michael's responses analyzed, questioned, or turned into media spectacles. They want to experience them privately, as a family. I think of how Corinna described it once. These moments are like finding diamonds in sand. They're precious because they're rare and they belong only to us. When I worked with the family, I continue, I saw how they treasured these small signs while never building false hope around them. They accepted Michael as he is now, while still honoring who he was before. They found a way to love both versions of him simultaneously. This approach allowed them to move forward with their lives, Mick pursuing his racing career, Gina Maria excelling in equestrian competitions, Corinna managing their business interests, while keeping Michael at the center of their family. They didn't wait for some miraculous recovery before living again. They built a new life that included Michael exactly as he is. The most important thing I learned from the Schumachers, I tell the interviewer, is that healing takes many forms. For them, it wasn't about Michael returning to his previous self, but about finding ways to maintain their bonds with him despite changed circumstances. This lesson extends far beyond the Schumacher family. It applies to anyone dealing with a loved one altered by injury or illness. That connection can exist even when it looks different than before. That presence and absence aren't the only options. So when people ask if there's hope in Michael Zayas' situation, I say, my voice growing stronger. The answer is yes, but not the kind of hope that makes dramatic headlines. It's the quiet hope of continued connection, of love that persists despite enormous challenges, of finding meaning in a journey that looks nothing like what was planned. The interviewer sits in silence for a moment, absorbing everything I've shared. Then she asks the question that brings us to my final revelation. And Corinna Schumacher gave you permission to share these observations publicly? I nod slowly. Yes, but there's more to that story. The message I received from Corinna that finally convinced me to speak came after something happened that broke her heart. The interviewer waits patiently as I gather my thoughts for this final part of my story. In late 2023, Mick was interviewed after a race. I begin. The reporter asked him about following in his father's footsteps, and Mick gave a beautiful, thoughtful answer about how proud he was of his father's legacy. Then the reporter asked a follow-up question that caught Mick off guard. Do you ever wish you could talk to your father about racing the way other drivers talk to their dads? Mick, emotional and tired after the race, answered honestly. Every day, he said. I would give everything just to have that conversation. The media took this statement and ran with it, I continue. Headlines appeared everywhere. Michael Schumacher cannot communicate with son. Mick reveals tragic truth. Father cannot speak. Schumacher family finally admits Michael's condition. None of these interpretations captured what Mick had actually meant. He wasn't saying his father couldn't communicate at all, or that there was no connection between them. He was expressing the natural wish of a son to have the kind of back-and-forth conversations they once shared about the sport they both loved. Corinna was devastated by how Mick's words were twisted, I explain. Not because they revealed private information. They hadn't. But because they reinforced the false narrative that Michael was essentially gone, that there was no meaningful connection possible between father and son. This misrepresentation hurt the family deeply. After 10 years of protecting Michael's privacy, they found themselves facing a new wave of speculation and pity, with people offering condolences as if he had died rather than continuing his different but still meaningful presence in their lives. 3 days after these headlines appeared, I received a call from Corinna, I say. She had been thinking about the letter I'd sent months earlier, asking permission to speak about my experience. On the phone, Corinna was calm but determined. She explained that she was tired of seeing Michael's condition portrayed in such black and white terms. She was tired of the narrative that he was either completely gone or secretly recovering. Neither captured the complex reality the family lived with. She told me, the world deserves to know that there is a middle ground, that Michael is still with us, still part of our lives, even if it's different than before, I recall. Tell them that Mick does talk with his father, and his father is present for those moments, even if he can't respond the way he once did. Corinna set clear boundaries about what I could share. No specific medical details. No private family moments without permission. No photographs. But she gave me her blessing to speak about the broader truth of Michael's continued presence in their lives. She said something I'll never forget. Tell the interviewer, "For years, we've protected Michael from the world. Maybe now it's time to protect his story from being lost." And so, I made this decision to speak, not to satisfy curiosity or generate headlines, but to share a truth that might help others on similar journeys. To let families like Martin's know that connection can persist even when it takes forms we struggle to understand or explain. The Michael Schumacher I came to know after his accident is different from the champion the world remembers, I conclude. But he remains a powerful presence in the lives of those who love him. He continues his most important race, not measured in lap times or championship points, but in moments of connection with the people who matter most. I think of Corinna's final words during our call. Tell them he's still here. Tell them we still see him. Tell them love doesn't need words. And so I have. We hope this story touched your heart and offered a new perspective on love, resilience, and the power of family. Where are you listening from? We'd love to know which corner of the world this story reached you in. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more such interesting and heartfelt stories that highlight the human spirit in challenging circumstances. If Elise's revelations about Michael and the Schumacher family moved you, please consider sharing this video with your friends and family. Every share helps spread kindness and awareness about brain injuries and the complex journeys families face when caring for loved ones. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back soon with another powerful story that reminds us of the connections that truly matter in life.